Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden, it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with David Pope. Hi, David. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jules. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
David, I wanted to chat to you a little bit about your life and your work. And tell me how you first got into audio production.
I've been working in voice for about 30 years. If we start back from the beginning, I went to university in the UK. I decided to do an honours degree, which is a 4-year degree. The reason I decided to do that was because for 2 of the years, we could do placements in industry. And so I was very fortunate. I managed to get an attachment as part of my degree working at the BBC. And also 1 other year, I was working for a production company in London. So I started getting into voice, the whole area of voice, because in the BBC, I was working with an audio editor. So I was actually working in the cutting rooms. But this was the old days of Steenbeck. So I actually learned to track lay sound, but with sellotape and 16mm mag. So that kind of shows how old I am. And then also when I was in the production company in London, one of the things that they were working with was this post-production tool called Paintbox. If you compare it to the special effects that they have now, it's kind of ridiculous. But if I mention Dire Straits, Money for Nothing, and also Aha, Take on Me. So I was very fortunate that I was actually working for that production company that was doing all of this post-production. From that, I then graduated and I moved down to London to start my amazing career. And my first job was working at the cheese counter at Harrods department store.
Brilliant.
So, having spent 4 years studying for a degree, there I was serving cheese. But that wasn't going to put me off. Not that there's anything wrong with serving cheese. But again, the reason that I chose this degree was because it gave me the possibility to make contacts whilst I was at university. And then moving on, I managed to get a job at the BBC. I was working on contracts. So I was working at BBC Ealing Film Studios. And again, as an assistant film editor. So I was really lucky. I got to work on some amazing productions. There was one called Orange is Not the Only Fruit. And I don't know if you used to watch a thing called Bergerac. This was a big thing in the UK. So I was working a lot in the cutting rooms on that. I recognized the interest that I also had was also with people. And so when I left the BBC, I moved back to Soho and I was working for production companies where we were doing TV commercials. And I was put in charge with doing a lot of the casting, and particularly the casting for voiceovers for commercials. That's really how I married the two together. I had this foundation in audio track laying, and then also starting to work with people and getting into audio booths and helping people to cast for TV commercials. That's how it all began. Then I moved to Hong Kong. And I mean, I didn't plan to be here. It's that typical story. I came here for a few months to visit a friend, and that was 26 years ago.
Yeah, I came for 2 years, 20 years ago, and I'm still here as well.
Nuts, isn't it?
Happens to all of us.
I was very lucky because I managed to get work with some global publishing companies, and I was being asked to produce and direct their audio production. So I was working with professional voice talent. And at the same time, I managed to get work at RTHK as well. So I was running, it was a two-part show. It was a kids' drama. And for those British people listening, it was a bit like Grange Hill on the radio. Every week, I would have a fictional secondary school and a fictional university, and scripts would be churned out weekly. And I was working with two casts of teenagers. So they were coming from local schools and also the international schools. And really, that's what got me back into working again in studios, working with voice talent, and really, you know, the whole process of production and audio direction.
Oh, wow, that Grange Hill kind of program with teenagers sounds fantastic, like a little radio play. How cool. I would have loved to have worked on something like that when I was a kid. I would have loved it.
It was amazing because actually, I mean, I have to share a story. About 2 years ago, I was sitting in Starbucks having a coffee with a friend, and this guy walked past, and I looked at him and I thought, I know you. And he looked at him and went, hello, David. And he did this like really kind of voice. And it turned out this guy was Ricky. And Ricky was the horrible bully triad, the character in the show who used to go around terrorizing all the girls and taking sort of dinner money off the people. This guy is now a barrister in Hong Kong. On my LinkedIn, some of these kids that I was working with, they're now working in banks, they're lawyers, they're in universities. It's absolutely incredible.
That is so cool.
What an experience.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. David, how did you come to create your own company, All Voice Talent, and why did you decide to branch out on your own?
All Voice Talent, it seemed a natural progression. As I said, I was working with voiceover talent, directing them in studios. Just at that point, I was getting asked a lot if I knew Cantonese voices, if I knew Putonghua voices. And also it was that time globally when a lot of production companies and ad agencies were starting to do these things which they call reversioning. For example, a client in the UK will shoot a TV commercial and then they'll send that out to regions to have that TV commercial dubbed in specific languages. So because I knew a lot of Cantonese voice artists, I was able to actually start doing the production for these Cantonese VOs. Absolutely made sense that I bring this all together as an agency. That's one side of All Voice Talent. This still very much runs today. It's been going for over 10 years now. We've got about 100 voiceover talent on our books. We do audio production for TV commercials, corporate videos, toys, games, apps, for anything that really requires voice. That's really how I got into that side. And then in terms of the voice coaching for adults and students, I wrote a training program for wannabe voiceover talent. Then I started getting calls from people saying, look, we've been on your website. I work in corporate communications. I'm in banking. I'm in legal. I've got to give a lot of presentations. I have to do pitches. I can't really see that you do this for this sort of corporate space. So I went back with my writer and we changed everything. And then we specifically developed core programs. So this is all about empowering people how to use their voice effectively in the workplace. And to date, we run one-on-one clinics at our recording studio or in company boardrooms. We do sessions of vocal impact assessments. We do online work. We also do workshops. So I do a lot of voice and presence workshops around Asia. Delighted to say that, yes, a few years ago, we launched a whole program called the Speak Up program, which is specifically for teenagers. I can talk a little bit about that later.
How important do you think the voice is when we're communicating with people?
Absolutely critical. There's a guy, probably everybody knows, a guy called Albert Moravian, who in the 1970s, he was saying that people were influenced three ways: 7% by content and the rest by voice and by body language. The whole thing really is about congruence. The voice, the message, and the physical presence, they all need to match to be an effective communicator, to make yourself heard, to be understood, and to have influence. The thing is, Jules, that we make judgments about people based on the sound of their voice. We have these visceral reactions, consciously or subconsciously, whether you like it or not. When you're hearing somebody on the telephone, on video conference, standing in front of a large group of people, you will end up making a judgment. So our voice, it really does affect how we're seen in terms of our personality, our emotional state, but also in terms of business, our professional competence.
Do you think somebody can change their voice or train their voice to sound different?
Yes and no. No, you're not going to end up sounding like George Clooney or Kate Blanchett, right? We have our own unique voice. Our voices are unique like fingerprints. But yes, we can change the basic sound of our voice. People who use their voices professionally, for example, teachers, people in the legal profession, trainers, politicians, etc., anybody who's really in the public speaking domain, they can actively modify the way that their voice sounds. For example, in terms of gravitas, a voice with gravitas, it's stronger, it's lower, and it's more resonant. And these are certainly things that we can change if we do vocal exercises. But think about people like Margaret Thatcher. She's always cited as somebody who changed her voice. It is still about this concept of authenticity. So take Margaret Thatcher, for example. She was once famously described as sounding like a cat scratching a blackboard. So she had a voice that was right up in her head. She was really speaking from a middle voice and right up in her nasal cavity. And if you look at earlier footage of her, she sounds very high, but she underwent vocal coaching from the National Theatre of Great Britain. And she learned to lower her larynx and also to speak from her chest. So she went on to win the general election. Now, I'm not obviously saying that she won it because she had a deep voice, but it is true to say that we can actively change the way that our voice sounds.
And you can really work on the rhythm and the pace and the tempo and the timbre and all of that as well, can't you? As well as perhaps lowering it into your chest. What are some of the important skills that we need to be aware of when we're using our voice?
I think really we can divide this into two parts. The first thing is we're talking about the physical aspects. This is to do with breathing and projection. The power and the quality of your voice depends on the power and the quality of your breath. So the first thing is you need to be really aware of the way that you are trying to project the voice, and that comes from diaphragmatic breathing. So when I'm working with clients, it's really getting them to understand how they can be aware of this vocal skill. To have power and impact is the way really it's connected to the breath. The other part is vocal variety. What is vocal variety? It's volume, intonation, stress, pacing, and pausing. These are the elements as well that go together to make a great speaker. They did some research recently in America. It was a group called Science of People. This was 2016. And they wanted to understand why some TED speakers were getting a few thousand hits, while other speakers who were speaking on the same subject were getting millions. And what they did was they looked at the verbal and the non-verbal aspects. They watched hundreds of hours of these speakers, and they found that those speakers that used vocal variety, their charisma level went up, which is their popularity, but more importantly, their credibility rating. In other words, people believed much more in what they were saying because they were using this vocal technique. Good speakers will know this. Good speakers know how to use their voice for meaning and for emphasis, to engage their audience, to inspire their listeners. A lot of research around the vocal variety. There's the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I sometimes quote this in workshops that I'm running. even just a 10% increase in vocal variety, it can actually have a highly significant impact in our attention to and retention of the message. So, you think about if you're sitting in an audience and you're listening to a speaker, if that speaker is using vocal variety, it will stop the listener from their mind from wandering off, thinking about the report they got to write, the email they got to send, what they're going to have for dinner tonight. So good speakers using these skills, they can really engage the audience.
Yeah, they can stop people from daydreaming or drifting off because they're keeping them engaged with the different variety and different tone and pace and energy and all of that. David, what are some of the common issues people have around voice and what can be done about it?
With a lot of the work that I do with clients, both adults and students, we record a lot, so we analyze the voice. I'm very fortunate that I've got many, many audio samples of people. And I would probably say that the most critical ones that come up in terms of vocal variety are speaking too fast, pacing, and also pausing or the lack of pausing. Why do people speak too fast? Well, firstly, obviously, it's nerves. When people get nervous, when the adrenaline kicks in, they want to get this speech, this presentation or whatever over as fast as possible. In terms of what can they do about it, I would strongly suggest if people have got some high-stakes stuff coming up, that they record themselves and listen back because they will hear what their speech rate is. It's always good to get some sort of idea. In terms of pausing, Mark Twain, he once said that words may be important, but no word is as important as a rightly timed pause.
Brilliant.
People don't like to pause. The thing is, pauses are there. Yes, they're there to add gravitas to your delivery, but they're also there for another reason, is to allow the audience to take in your information. So people need to be mindful of the audience. So if you're racing through because you're nervous, you want to get off as fast as possible, it's not going to help the message get embedded. Another thing that could be done about that in terms of pausing is this idea called chunking. So what I do is when I'm working with people, if they have an area of text and they want to think about where to pause, we'll go through, and it's literally you're choreographing a piece of paper. So you're putting oblique strokes down on the areas where you breathe. And what's amazing in that is as well, what you'll see is that in each chunk, there's one word that needs to receive the most stress. And so, as I said, this whole concept of vocal variety, and suddenly what's happening is you're slowing down and then you're stressing the key words. And that really, really helps. That's in terms of vocal variety. On the other side, which is the physical aspect, a lot of the work that I'm asked to do is about pitch. So this concept of an authoritative voice. So again, this is about diaphragmatic breathing, and it's also about understanding our lowest natural pitch range. Everybody has a different lowest natural pitch range according to gender and also according to our physical stature. So I'm working with people to, again, to be in their authentic range and to try and work to slightly dropping the voice a bit. The other thing, which is probably really important, is articulation. So articulation is enunciation and pronunciation. So this is very, very important, especially now with everything that's going on. So much work is going on to Zoom, and teachers who are having to deliver and students who may be having to give presentations online. The idea of understanding how to move the mouth and to work on, we do exercises which is all about releasing the root of the tongue, which is attached to what they call the hyoid bone. So I do a lot of these exercises, getting people to really start to move their mouth. So those would probably be the 4 key things that are the most important, but there are ways to overcome it, definitely.
How does having control over your voice help your vocal impact?
Good speakers, they can change their voice according to content and also according to the audience. If we think about in our day-to-day interactions, are we always using the same voice? You're at work, you're in an office environment, you're speaking to the senior management, you're speaking to colleagues, you're speaking to juniors. As teachers, you're speaking to students, you're speaking to other members of staff, senior members. Are you always using the same voice? Nowadays, voice is more important than ever. So you've got video conferencing, teleconferencing, pitches, presentations, university interviews, the theory of knowledge school presentations. So I think there's pressure on all of us, not only to perform well, but to sound good while we're doing it. Because if we don't sound good, if we don't make a good enough impression, then potentially we might miss opportunities.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that it really does play such an important role in success, really. And that's part of why it's so important to have an understanding of all these things you're talking about. What's the impact of both positive and negative voices?
From my understanding, that the first time there was research done into positive and negative impact of voices, it was actually by a guy called Julius Pollux, and this was in 2nd century AD Greece. Yes, so it's quite a long time.
Wow.
And he was looking at the vocal qualities of people, and he was looking at voices that were engaging, persuasive, feeble. Even from many, many years ago, we're looking at this impact of positive and negative voices. We talk about a warm voice. What is warm? If we're breaking it down, that really means an engaging voice. And this means warmth comes from tone and it comes from pitch. These are voices that are easy to listen to. If you're bringing energy and warmth, and also I mentioned before about these pitch ranges, if you're bringing energy and warmth and you have a slightly lower voice, then it means that you can really command attention of either single listeners or entire rooms. That's a positive impact. But what about a negative impact? As I said before, we have these visceral reactions to people's voices, these thin, annoying, irritating voices. If you're trying to convey leadership, if you're trying to be strong, win over the audience, having that voice is not going to have a good effect because they're going to be judged. That person will be judged potentially on their character. They are annoying. They sound boring. It's actually, these words, what it means is, it means that they're not using intonation. It means that they're not using stress. We need to be careful about the impact of these voices.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you mean when you talk about an authentic voice?
Good question. I mean, what is an authentic voice? We're not talking about an actor's type of voice. So the work that I'm doing is really getting people to be authentic. You know, an actor's training is very, very different. To be able to stand on the stage and project night after night, right up into the gods, that's a different kind of training. For me, an authentic voice is basically, it's not forced and it's not false. I've had people contacting me and saying things like, I want you to help me speak like Benedict Cumberbatch. I've had another person, a British guy actually, about 2-3 years ago, saying to me, do you know that voice in Kevin Spacey, the character in House of Cards? I want you to try and make me sound like him. Well, if you think about it, you've got a British accent and you've got this guy who's American Machiavellian politician with a Southern accent. It's just not going to happen. An authentic voice is about using the voice that you've been given and finessing it. So it's really about vocal polish. And I've mentioned exercises and also a real awareness of how you're sounding. Looking at ways that you can alter the pitch at appropriate times and you can sound, let's say, more authoritative, but in a natural way.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And that's really good advice, I think, for anybody who's trying to develop their public speaking skills or just the gravitas of the way that they speak. So I think that's excellent. Tell me a bit about your Speak Up Youth program.
Sure. So the Speak Up Youth program, this really came about because, as I said, I've been running workshops and also doing one-on-one training with adults. And a lot of people would say to me, hey, this is great. Do you do this for kids? And so basically, about 3 years ago, I thought, right, we really need to sit down and see what is needed in this area. We developed the Speak Up program for teenagers, and it's very similar to what we're offering to the executives, managing directors, TEDx speakers that we're working with. That's training in a professional recording studio. But to research it, what I did, I went and I talked to a lot of vice principals, careers counselors, heads of drama, parents, students. I really wanted to understand what was needed, not only in terms of their school life, but afterwards as well. I really wanted to be able to give them a skill for life. And that's the ethos of the Speak Up program. It's that vocal confidence is an essential skill for life. We're really trying to follow that. There's one side of the program which is working on a one-to-one level. This is in our recording studio, or at the moment we're conducting sessions online. So we've developed 3 units. One of them is just called Voice and Confidence. The other one is interview skills, and the other one is presentation skills. It's a real deep dive into these specific areas. But we've also recently started working with ESF and international schools and also local schools, running these little bite-sized sessions. So we go in and we do like an hour session specifically about voice and an hour session specifically about presence, looking at all the aspects of how people can look good and sound good. Because this is especially important when you think quite a big percentage of the grade is awarded in their schoolwork for their communication skills and their presentation skills.
Yeah, and it's a part of the IB and GCSE where they have to do presentations. They've got to be able to get up in front of a class and do oral presentations or speak in assemblies. And then they've got university interviews and things like that. There's many areas, and it's becoming more and more prevalent where young people have to get up and be able to speak publicly. These are really important skills.
And this is exactly what I found when I was doing the research in the schools with the parents and the students. I was finding that there was a lot more emphasis now on this soft skills, preparing them, as you say, for university life, for internships, moving all the way through to their first jobs.
And that's why public speaking skills are really important to learn. But are there other reasons why they're important for people to learn as well?
It really is. It's about the awareness of how you come across and what energy you're bringing to these interactions. I think in terms of large groups, but also in terms of small groups or just one-on-ones, firstly, it's about competition. We mentioned this before. Emphasis today in a lot of areas is about these soft skills, hiring staff, interns, internal promotions as well. And communication is such a large part of that. When they're hiring, they're looking for the whole package, qualifications and communication skills. The other thing is I work a lot with talent development and leadership development teams as well. For example, people who are being promoted and they're in positions where now they're having to go out, they're having to pitch for business, and maybe they're having to give talks to undergraduates to sell their firm or sell the company. So they are representing the brand. It's really important because they are representing the brand. It's really important they understand how that they can communicate because they have to have a little bit of gravitas. They have to have humor. They have to have warmth. It really is, again, they're selling the identity of that company.
And also their own personal brand as well. We're all our own personal brand too. So all of those things not only sell the company, but they sell you.
Yes, absolutely. I like to call it the virtuous cycle. So what happens is if you're working on your voice and you come across with more confidence and your audience, they pick up on that, that kind of instills you with this confidence. You deliver better. The audience picks up on that. You see, it's very much a virtuous circle. And what is public speaking? I've been talking about school presentations and public speaking within work, the corporate world, but it's not just about work and school. I've been asked to work on wedding speeches, retirement speeches. I had a vicar. I was working with a vicar to help him hone his skills on delivering better sermons. It really is a skill for life, basically, to be a good
That's so interesting. That's so cool that you could be helping different people from all walks of life.
It's wonderful. It's rich and varied, the work.
Yeah, sounds really amazing. How can you calm somebody or help them feel less nervous before they start public speaking? Because it's very common, especially when people don't have that much experience, to feel nervous before public speaking. What tips do you have to calm the nerves?
Firstly, as I said before, it's very, very natural for people to get nervous. It's a good thing in a way because what's happening is the adrenaline is kicking in and people therefore become more focused. If you're going up onto the stage or whatever interaction and you're a little bit too relaxed, it's not going to work. But yes, calming the nerves. Neuroscience, it's now proving through research what Buddhist monks and mindfulness practitioners, they've known for years. So basically, by adopting these simple breathing techniques, you can better manage the amygdala, which is kind of the reptile brain, and you can better manage that. That's the thing that governs the stress response. In other words, you can learn to handle stress. I mentioned earlier about breathing. We go through a whole system of breathing exercises. There's one called box breathing, which is very, very good. And not only increases the lung capacity, but it actually reduces your stress and it can lower your heart rate. There's another exercise we do, which is about filling the lungs full of air. According to the United States Lung Association, we take about 20,000 breaths a day. However, we only use about 30 to 35% of our lung capacity. So therefore, if you're nervous, what happens is we get a bit short of breath. The vocal tract, right up in the throat, it sort of contracts. So by adopting these breathing exercises, breathing, filling the lungs right up to capacity, you're not only energizing yourself, but you're actually calming yourself down. These are great, great exercises. There's another one that I teach people for calming the nerves. It's what they call the dragon's tail. And what you basically do is you stand tall, you're really grounded, and you rock a little bit forward, a little bit back. And you imagine that you've got a dragon's tail coming out the back, right? And once you start rocking back, if you visualize that dragon's tail, it actually holds you. It holds you in a space of being strong and centered. When I'm working with people doing either town halls or TEDx speakers, I'll take them through this process, calming the nerves, getting them to understand positioning, and then they walk out and they're strong, they're centered, and they're very, very focused. So it's a great way of calming the nerves.
The dragon's tail activity leads very well into my next question, which is about, do you work with body language when teaching these voice skills?
Absolutely. You need the whole package. What do you need? You need good content, good ideas. You need a good voice, and also you need good physical presence. This is absolutely critical if you want to connect to or if you want to impress any audience. This is either an audience that is large in a school assembly, or if it is an audience that is just one-on-one and you're sitting maybe having an appraisal or you're having an interview. Yes, I mentioned that I have a lot of data about the voice. Likewise, what we do is we record people on video and we analyze it so people can pick up on these unconscious habits. Again, in terms of body language, there's two real areas. There's the internal and the external. Internally, Charles Darwin, he theorized about 150 years ago, what we do with our face and body on the outside, it will affect how we feel on the inside. There's been a lot of research on this in the 2000s. There's a guy called Brignol, a social psychologist. And the idea is that our attitudes are closely linked to our postures. Did you see that thing on Netflix recently called Cheer? Did you see that show called Cheer?
Yeah, I did.
Cheer team, right?
I did. I loved it. That was so, oh my gosh, how scary.
Right. Well, did you notice, the finals when they were there, did you notice how they were all there and they were all really psyching each other up? Using the body. Yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. So what's happening is you are using the internal to create the external. If we turn that on the other way, you think about somebody stands up on a stage, their body is stooped or their arms are crossed. What's going to happen? It's going to feed into their self-doubt and confidence. So it's very, very linked like that. That's the internal. Obviously, the external, pretty obvious. It's about posture, it's about smiling, and it's about using the hands, all of these that engage. I mentioned this research from the TED speakers. They found that, again, there was a link between the number of hand gestures that people used and the number of views that they had. They're talking about adopting a confident posture, opening the body up.
The more they use their hands, the more views they got?
This is what they were saying, because again, what the research they were actually watching, they found that people were scoring the same with the sound on and the sound off. And so this really shows that gesture and body language is very, very important. Obviously, smiling. There's been some research into smiling. They say that it reduces your cortisol levels. And also, if you think about it, when you are wanting to connect to an audience, just a small smile can really go a long way. When people are very nervous, they sometimes maybe have a sort of steely voice. They're terrified. So they have that look of fear. But just smiling, it actually relaxes the face and it relaxes you into it. And obviously using your hands. Their hands are there to underline your meaning and to emphasize things. So you're using your hands to correlate, to be congruent with your voice. So it is the whole package that's so necessary.
What do you think the importance of body language is when it comes to creating a positive first impression?
We're talking about large groups. We're talking about one-on-one meetings. It's all about that first impression. The first thing, a handshake. Do you judge people by their handshake? I certainly do. Right, the wet fish. This is what we call the wet fish. You're trying to be engaging. You're trying to connect with somebody. If you're walking up to somebody and you're trying to create a good impression, you need to have a good handshake. Not too firm. That's obviously too aggressive. Certainly not pulling into you. Some people do that, and that is not good. But it needs to be strong. It needs to match the pressure. There's also eye contact as well. We call it eyebrow flash. I run a session called Your Best Self, which is all about maximizing your impact. So the eyebrow flash, exactly what you're doing with me. So when you're engaging with somebody, the flash of the eyebrows shows that you're interested. It also shows that you're acknowledging that you're listening to what I'm saying. And likewise, in terms of, let's say you're sitting down in a chair. If you're slumping in a chair, you're leaning on the desk, and you're trying to pitch something, it's not going to be congruent. The message is not going to be congruent with your body language. Is that creating a positive impression? Absolutely not. You don't look confident. You're not engaged. You might look disinterested. On the other side, I've certainly been to meetings where the person is sitting opposite me. They have their leg crossed away from me. They have their arm leaning over the chair away from me, and they're kind of looking down at me. What sort of impression does that give? You know, it's dominance, it's challenging.
Superiority,
not open to discussion. But interestingly, Jules, behind a lot of that superiority is fear. I look beyond that. I just think, okay, well, it's fine. I know
it can be overcompensating, can't it? They're overcompensating for some inadequacy or insecurity that they may have.
Absolutely. So much of this physical presence, it is tied up to psychology, definitely.
What are some of your key tips for presentations and pitches for our listeners? If you could give like a top 5 or something that really you need to think about.
Okay, key tips. Number 1, if you are able to write out your speech in full, I would strongly suggest that you do that, and at least a week before you rehearse it. Now, I mentioned about videoing it. Get a friend to do it, or just set the camera up on your own, because what you will do, you will see unconscious habits that you don't know that you've got, which are physical, but you will also get to hear things like, these filler words, which are incredibly intrusive.
And we're not often aware that we're doing them, are we? Like I have a friend who would rock back and forward when she spoke in assembly, but she didn't know she was doing it. And then I had another one that would say, okay, da-da-da, okay. And she had no idea she was doing it.
That's right. And another habit, people go, you know. Well, I don't know. This is why I'm listening to you speak. This is why I've signed up to your whatever. Yes, absolutely. So this irons that all out. I mentioned earlier this idea of chunking. So what you do is you can actually choreograph the speech. You can then find out these are the areas where you slow down. where you pause, where you stress. So in other words, you're really bringing the speech to life. That would be ideally a week before. Right before you're about to hit the stage, go into that meeting or get ready for that university interview, do the warm-ups. Warm up the voice, warm up the body. So the voice, breathing, articulation. There's another great exercise called the siren, which that warms up the larynx, which pretty much the name sums up what it is. You're sounding like a police siren. But it's really good because it warms up the larynx. And in terms of the body, it's about adopting what they call these power poses. Amy Cuddy, who was at Harvard Business School, she was the one who started that whole thing. But if you're on your own, stand there, legs wide apart, arms wide apart, and then you can just smile, a big exaggerated smile. And what will happen is you'll start just releasing this tension, releasing. And then, as I said, if you're breathing properly, if you're standing big, and then if you want, you could do some of the things that I mentioned in that show, Cheer. I'm brilliant. I'm going to do it. And that will really get you ready for it.
That's excellent advice.
The final thing, during, I would say relax. You see, if your breathing is forced, what happens is your voice pitch gets higher and your pace speeds up. And remember also enthusiasm, it's contagious. Think about stressing positive words as well when you're going on stage. I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you so much. Just slightly exaggerating those words. And it will just get you into that sort of passion because we've all been in this position. And then what I would say is finally, be patient. It takes a while to master these techniques. I've worked with people all the way up from CEO all the way down to secondary school students. It's just about being patient. You're not going to nail it immediately, but if you do it more and more and more, the habits become entrenched and it becomes second nature. And I can guarantee if you're prepared to work at it, then you're going to fly.
Absolutely. Practice does really make perfect. You can only get better if you keep practicing and the more that you do it. Like I've been podcasting for years and public speaking for years and running assemblies and things like that. You still have that element of nervousness. And like you said, that's helpful. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps you engaged. It keeps your energy levels up. It's perfectly normal. It's actually a very, very important part of it. But then how can somebody speak with gravitas and presence when public speaking?
Gravitas, it comes from the Latin word gravis, which means heaviness or weight. So if you look it up in the dictionary, it will say seriousness, authority, dignity. It's been used in the world of business to describe this whole raft of qualities. So things like confidence, poise, professionalism, respectability, executive presence. But for me, Jules, it's just about two things. It's about passion and it's about authority. So I run a workshop. It's called Gravitas, Voice and Presence. We look at this area. If somebody is passionate, if they're going on too much with too much passion, what usually happens is they sound a little bit desperate. Like me.
Well, they can lose
credibility.
Yeah.
If somebody comes across with too much authority, they're a little bit frightening. And what they do, there's no warmth. There's no engagement with the audience. For me, it's about putting the two together. It's mixing passion with authority. What this is in terms vocally, it's about a balance. So it's a balance of authority in the voice, but also this energy that you spoke about earlier. There's a confidence, and that comes with breathing, that comes with understanding vocal variety, and also a warmth in the voice. And the idea really is to inspire respect and to engage the interest of audiences. And just to really say as well that this is the same for men as it is for women. If you're doing these exercises, irrespective of your gender or your physical stature, anybody who is using these exercises and doing them, you can put these two together and you can come across with gravitas.
That's so interesting. I think that's very useful information. David, can you tell me what you think makes a good narration or a good story?
In terms of the voice, the good narration, well, as I said at the very beginning, I'm very fortunate. I work with some great voiceover artists, and a lot of the work that we do in studios is actually recording audiobooks. So we're doing it for all levels and for different speakers of English as well, second language speakers and also native English speakers. The first thing is about speed. You've got to be aware of your audience. So, for example, if you're recording an audiobook and you're speaking to kindergarten level, you've actually got to have the speech rate very slow and very measured, but at the same time, not painfully slow because it will put them to sleep. Likewise, if you're speaking to adults, then you can speed right up. The other important thing is that you've got to capture the feel of the poem or the story, the emotion behind it, because listeners, they only have the voices to go on. A voice has got to encompass everything: joy, tension, fear, anger. It's got to show all these emotions. I mentioned earlier, when I was training people to be voice talent, I would give them a sentence. And the sentence is, "Don't be afraid, little one. Come with me and I will protect you." What I do is I get them to deliver it in a sort of a superhero, nice, kind, encouraging man. So it'll be like, "Don't be afraid, little one. Come with me and I will protect you." Okay? And then they have to do it like a sort of evil wizard, that sort of voice. So again, you've got to play with the voice and physically with the body as well. It might be, "Don't be afraid, little one. Come with me and I will protect you."
That's brilliant. Yeah, it's great. It really does show the difference in how you can deliver exactly the same thing.
Absolutely. So the idea is to get the feel of the story and then you engage the listener that way. And actually, interesting you asked that because I'm actually developing something for teachers. The idea about being able to read with meaning and feeling, looking at all of these areas where we can be very playful with the voice to understand our vocal range, putting on boy voice, girl voice, narrator, giant, ogre, scary witch, just having a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. And that would really get young kids in particular very engaged. Well, actually, any age gets engaged more in a story when you're getting it read with lots of different voices. David, what do you think some of the challenges that people are facing when teaching or conferencing on Zoom as a result of COVID-19 at the moment?
Well, they're no different to challenges that have always been on VC, over video conference. I actually developed something about 3 or 4 years ago. It's an online coaching session. It's called Leadership over Video Conference. And then it morphed into another one called Effective Communication over Video Conference. And what we're looking at is how we can engage an audience through this medium of communication. There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. People talk about Zoom fatigue. I totally get it. How can you engage people, certainly as a teacher, how can you engage large groups of children? A lot of that is through the voice. A lot of that is through presence, but it's much more, I think, about the voice. How you can use the voice. Again, all of these areas that I talked about, vocal variety, about using projection and power in the voice to engage. If you're in a business sense, how can you lead teams? There was some very interesting research done a few years ago, and it was all about the idea of, is video conferencing a good substitute for face-to-face meetings? And what they found was that the people that were having these constant video conferencing meetings, they were actually getting what they call cognitive overload. And I think we're seeing a lot of that happening at the moment. The challenges, identifying who's speaking, coordinating eye contact, turn taking, conversation pacing. And what was happening? They were finding that people were using what they called heuristics. In other words, they were making an educated guess, or they were using intuition. They weren't so much listening to the quality of the speaker's arguments, but they were actually thinking about how good they perceive them to be. And I think this is a real problem now. In terms of the challenges, I think what we've got to look at is how we can really engage people over video conferencing. Now, there are, of course, all the other bits and pieces in terms of environment. I've been doing online sessions with people, and they're in bedrooms and their children are coming in disturbing them, things like that. It is very challenging. This is about the location of the calls. There's the technology issues as well. But I think we've all had to learn very, very fast.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Tell me a little bit about what World Voice Day is.
Yeah, sure. World Voice Day, it was established as a special day of awareness, of recognition, and also celebration of the human voice. It takes place every April 16th. And the aim really is to increase the public awareness of the importance of the voice. Now, what do we mean by that? I mean, last year in 2019, their logo was "Be kind with your voice," not "Be kind to your voice." So it's very, very broad. The idea is messaging, being kind to people. The idea of communicating with passion, with impact, just being sensitive. And I think this is very important now. This year, it was focused on your voice. I think this probably couldn't be more apt considering everything that's going on. It's not only looking at that, but it's also looking at alerting people to voice problems that people have. Various events happening globally. You have like storytelling workshops, voice lessons, singing, building a virtual choir, there are puppet shows, anything really that's devoted to the voice. It's a wonderful idea. Anybody can get involved.
And when is it, David?
It's April 16th annually.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes, it's just gone.
We just missed it. Okay.
It just happened, yes.
Oh, how cool. David, thank you so much for talking to me today about all voice talent and how you work with people to help develop their voice skills and their public speaking skills and so many other aspects. It's really a full personal development course. It's amazing. If my listeners would like to contact you and learn more about what you offer, how can they do that?
If they're interested in finding out the work that we do, they can go to allvoicetalent.com, and everything that we offer in terms of our coaching programs and our voiceover is there. I also regularly publish toolkits, voice and presence toolkits on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to link with me on LinkedIn, they'll find a few little exercises, some of the ones that I actually talked about in today's interview. Please feel free to link to me on LinkedIn.
That's cool. I'll definitely put your LinkedIn information and your website in my show notes so people can get in touch with you that way as well. David, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely great. And I've learned loads. It's been brilliant. I've made a few notes while we've been talking. It's been fab. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Jules, for getting on the show. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
It's been wonderful to have you on the show. And for my listeners out there, if this is something that you're interested in or your friends and family are interested in, please can you share this podcast with them? And if you could go to iTunes to rate and review us, that would be amazing. It'll help my podcast go up the charts, and it will also help people find David and his All Voice Talent Company. Once again, David, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and good luck with everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Jules, so much.
You're welcome. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.